In today's world, we are constantly bombarded with information. From news headlines to social media posts, the amount of content that hits us daily is staggering. But here's the thing. What if the first story you hear is false? How does that affect what you believe? And more importantly, how does it affect the decisions you make? When we hear a story for the first time, our minds are wired to latch onto it as is fact. Whether it's a news article, a friend's version of an event, or even a rumor, we're more likely to believe the first version of the story we hear, regardless of its accuracy. And here's why this matters. Misinformation is rampant, and often the first narrative people are exposed to is far from the truth. Once that misinformation takes root in our minds, it becomes incredibly difficult to dislodge. Even if the facts emerge later, the damage has often already been done. In this video, we're going to explore why that happens. We'll dive deep into the psychology behind first impressions, why changing your mind is so difficult, and how misinformation exploits these human tendencies to manipulate our thinking. From the emotional discomfort of being wrong to the power of false narratives, we'll uncover why misinformation is one of the most dangerous tools in the modern world.
Our brains are incredible machines designed to process vast amounts of information quickly. But in order to handle the overload, our minds take shortcuts. These shortcuts, known as cognitive heuristics, help us make quick judgments about the world around us. While these shortcuts are essential for day-to-day functioning, they can also leave us vulnerable to deception, especially when it comes to misinformation.
From an evolutionary standpoint, humans developed the ability to make snap judgments for survival. Imagine early humans encountering a predator. The ability to quickly assess a situation and make a decision, fight or flee, could mean the difference between life and death. Today, we no longer face the same survival threats, but our brains still rely on these quick, intuitive judgments. When we encounter new information, especially in a fast-paced environment like social media or breaking news, we don't have the time to fully analyze every detail. Instead, we form quick conclusions based on the first piece of information we receive. This is the essence of first impressions, and once they are formed, they tend to stick. In psychology, there's a concept called the primacy effect. This effect explains why the first piece of information we receive has a stronger impact on us than subsequent information. Whether it's the first few seconds of a video, the opening lines of an article, or the first story we hear about an event, the primacy effect shapes our perception. And here's where it gets tricky. Once that first impression is established, our brains work to protect it. When confronted with new information that contradicts our initial belief, we experience something called cognitive dissonance, a mental discomfort that arises from holding conflicting ideas. To reduce this discomfort, most people will cling to their first belief, dismissing the new information as false or irrelevant. This is why the first narrative is so powerful and why misinformation that spreads quickly can be so dangerous.
It's one thing to learn new information, but it's a completely different experience when that new information directly challenges something we already believe. The process of accepting that we might be wrong isn't just uncomfortable, it can be downright painful. This is known as cognitive dissonance, and it plays a significant role in why people resist changing their minds. Cognitive dissonance occurs when a person is confronted with information that contradicts their beliefs, values, or perceptions. This conflict creates psychological tension, and humans by nature strive to reduce this tension. The easiest way to do that? Stick with the belief that feels more comfortable, the one you've already accepted. This leads to what psychologists call motivated reasoning, where people actively seek out information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. For example, imagine you've believed for years that a particular politician is honest and trustworthy. One day, a major news outlet reports on a scandal involving that politician. Rather than immediately accepting this new information, you might feel a surge of doubt and discomfort. To alleviate that discomfort, your brain will start finding reasons to dismiss the new information. Maybe the news outlet is biased, or perhaps the story is being exaggerated. You might even search for other articles or opinions that defend the politician, reinforcing your original belief. Cognitive dissonance doesn't just affect our thinking, it also triggers strong emotional responses. Being wrong feels like a personal attack, especially when our beliefs are tied to our identity. If you identify with a political party, social group, or even a certain worldview, having those beliefs challenged can feel like a direct assault on who you are as a person. Our brains are wired to protect us from harm, and this includes emotional harm. When faced with information that threatens our identity or worldview, our brain's alarm system, the amygdala, kicks into gear. This can cause feelings of anxiety, frustration, or even anger. And instead of engaging with the new information, our emotional defenses go up. We reject the new narrative not because it's wrong, but because it threatens our sense of self. Changing your mind isn't just uncomfortable, it's hard work. Humans tend to be creatures of habit, and that applies to our thinking patterns as well. Once we've formed an opinion or belief, it becomes embedded in our cognitive framework, meaning that accepting new, conflicting information requires us to essentially rewire our thinking. One of the key psychological forces at play here is confirmation bias. This is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or values. Once we've formed an opinion, our brains automatically prioritize information that supports that view and dismiss or downplay information that contradicts it. Let's say you strongly believe in a specific policy and you read an article that criticizes it. Instead of considering the opposing viewpoint, your brain will automatically begin looking for flaws in the article, such as questioning the author's credibility or the sources they used. At the same time, you'll be more likely to remember information from sources that support your belief. This mental filtering happens subconsciously and is a major reason why first impressions and misinformation can be so powerful. Once the brain has formed a belief, it actively works to maintain it by cherry-picking information that reinforces the belief and ignoring or discounting anything that challenges it. Another powerful factor that makes changing your mind difficult is the social and cultural environment you're a part of. Humans are inherently social creatures, and we often derive our sense of identity from the groups we belong to, whether that's political parties, religious communities, social movements, or even friend groups. When our beliefs align with the views of the group we identify with, it creates a sense of belonging and social harmony. However, when new information threatens those shared beliefs, it can feel like a betrayal of the group itself. Changing your mind about a core belief can also mean risking alienation from your community or social group. This is why people often double down on their existing beliefs, even when presented with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The fear of being ostracized or rejected by one's peers creates a powerful incentive to stay aligned with the group's views, even at the expense of intellectual honesty. Now that we understand why people form strong first impressions and why it's so hard to change those impressions, let's dive into how misinformation takes advantage of these human tendencies. Those who spread misinformation, whether intentionally or unintentionally, often capitalize on the psychological principles we've discussed to manipulate public perception and control narratives. Misinformation has one major advantage over the truth: it spreads faster. In our era of social media, where breaking news and viral stories can circulate around the globe within minutes, the first narrative to reach people is often the one that sticks. A false claim, a misleading headline, or a doctored image can gain traction before anyone has time to fact-check or offer a rebuttal. And once that initial false impression is made, it becomes much harder to correct. Studies have shown that even when misinformation is debunked, the correction doesn't spread as far or as fast as the original false claim. Furthermore, those who have already internalized the misinformation are often resistant to accepting the correction due to cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. Another tactic that makes misinformation so dangerous is its ability to manipulate emotions. False or misleading stories often use sensationalized language, inflammatory rhetoric, or shocking imagery to provoke a strong emotional reaction. When we experience a surge of emotion, whether it's fear, anger, or outrage, we're less likely to think critically or evaluate the information carefully. Instead, we act on impulse, sharing the story with others, or forming an immediate opinion without taking the time to verify the facts. Emotions play a crucial role in solidifying first impressions. If a false narrative triggers a strong emotional response, That emotional connection reinforces the belief, making it even harder to change your mind later on. This is why misinformation often appeals to emotions rather than reason, because once you've emotionally invested in a story, you're less likely to question it. Misinformation isn't just dangerous because it misleads people in the short term. The long-term consequences can be far more damaging, as false narratives become embedded in the public consciousness and influence society as a whole. This can affect everything from political decisions and public policy to social cohesion and trust in institutions. Undermining trust in institutions. One of the most insidious effects of widespread misinformation is its ability to erode trust in institutions such as the media, government, and scientific communities. When people are constantly exposed to conflicting narratives, especially those that accuse institutions of bias or corruption, it creates a sense of confusion and skepticism. Over time, this skepticism can evolve into outright distrust, making it harder for these institutions to function effectively. For example, misinformation about the safety of vaccines has contributed to a decline in public trust in medical and scientific authorities. This has real-world consequences, as people may refuse life-saving treatments or spread false claims that further endanger public health. The same pattern can be seen in misinformation about elections, climate change, and other critical issues. When trust in institutions erodes, it becomes much harder to reach consensus or take collective action, which ultimately weakens the fabric of society. Polarization and the echo chamber effect. Another long-term consequence of misinformation is the deepening of political and social polarization. When people form their beliefs based on misinformation and surround themselves with like-minded individuals who reinforce those beliefs, it creates an echo chamber effect. In these echo chambers, dissenting opinions are dismissed, and alternative perspectives are rarely considered. This polarization makes productive dialogue and compromise nearly impossible. Instead of engaging in thoughtful debate, people become entrenched in their positions, seeing the other side as not just wrong but fundamentally opposed to their values. The result is a divided society where cooperation and mutual understanding are replaced by hostility and suspicion. Given everything we've discussed, it's clear that the first narrative the public is exposed to is incredibly powerful. Whether it's true or false, the first version of a story shapes how people think about an issue, influences their emotional reactions, and sets the framework for all subsequent information they receive. The role of the media. In a world where information moves at lightning speed, the media plays a crucial role in shaping the first narrative. Journalists, news outlets, and social media platforms have a responsibility to ensure that the information they distribute is accurate, balanced, and thoroughly vetted. Unfortunately, the pressure to break news quickly can sometimes lead to errors, omissions, or sensationalism that distorts the truth. It's not just traditional news outlets that are responsible for the first narrative. Anyone with a social media account can contribute to the spread of information. This democratization of content creation has its benefits, but it also means that misinformation can spread unchecked by fact-checkers or editorial oversight. Correcting the record. Once misinformation has spread, correcting the record becomes a monumental task. People are less likely to engage with corrections than they are with the original false narrative, especially if the misinformation aligns with their pre-existing beliefs. This is why fact-checking, while important, is often insufficient on its own. To effectively combat misinformation, it's essential to establish trust and credibility with the audience before the misinformation takes hold. This requires not only fact-checking but also media literacy education, critical thinking skills, and a commitment to transparency from news outlets and public figures. Misinformation is more than just false information. It's a powerful force that preys on human psychology, exploiting our cognitive biases, emotional responses, and social dynamics. The first story we hear about an event or issue often becomes the one we believe, even if it's later proven false. Changing our minds is a difficult and sometimes painful process, made even harder by the emotional and psychological barriers we face when confronted with new information. This is why the first narrative matters so much. The stories we tell and the information we share have a profound impact on how people see the world, make decisions, and engage with society. In an age of misinformation, it's more important than ever to be vigilant, critical, and thoughtful about the information we consume and share. By understanding the psychology behind first impressions and the dangers of misinformation, we can become more resilient in the face of false narratives and better equipped to seek out the truth. Only then can we hope to build a society that values accuracy, integrity, and informed decision-making. Remember to like and subscribe for more video content. Sapiens quae vigilat.